So, Jesus. Hello. I thought I would take a look at Jim Bob, famous old Jim Bob's argument against naturalism that he gives. That's sort of supposed to follow a similar structure to C.S. Lewis's argument from reason, though he takes a kind of pre-suppy angle approach. Obviously, Jim Bob, if you ever watch this and you want to talk to me about it, feel free to reach out to me. And if you're here in the chat, you're welcome to join and talk. So I'm going to take a little look at that. Then I'm going to work on a Bayesian joke that I started and then got bored of and distracted. And then maybe I'm going to talk a little bit more about Philip Goff because he's done a Substack article today responding to some of the videos and things that people have made around him and his publicity stunt. So the first thing that I want to look at, let me go to that. What's his name? Jim Bob, made by Jim Bob. I also noticed that Alex O'Connor did, this isn't the right guy. Alex O'Connor did a video too on a similar topic, though obviously not responding to Jim Bob. Maybe I will have a little look at that. So we go to Jim Bob's channel, Ultimate Frisbee World Champion. Where is this video? This is the one, I think. Maybe it's this one as well. I might have a look at both, but I'll look at this one.
Question is,
so yeah, let's go.
Is a tornado?
Oh, wait, you can hear, right? Yeah.
Tornado as an effect of physics truer than an earthquake if they're both just pure effects?
Yeah, they're just effects. What do you mean by truer?
Right. Yeah, it doesn't make sense, right? An effect is just an effect, right? It's not true or false, right?
I'm going to pause it and comment on this point. I think people can already sort of piece together, where Jim Bob's coming from on this. And, I can appreciate and understand the thinking behind it because, if naturalism or physicalism is true, then all the world is like tornadoes and volcanoes, processes like that. But you wouldn't say the sentence, a volcano is truer than wind or something. So where's the space in that picture of the world for there to be things like logic and truth, right? I think that the argument trades on basically constructing these biases based off of the grammar in the sort of thought experiment that Jim Bob is offering here. So, he's telling us, well, isn't physicalism just like volcanoes and wind? And then he's expecting us to just kind of like buy that and not really offer any kind of more robust account of language and what it is, or what's happening when people do logic, to think about that any further. And then, like with this guy, when he's got them on the back foot, it's like, oh no, how do I kind of get out of that? So I'll talk about what the issues are a bit more.
Okay. Yeah. So if the premise one is that effects of physics can't be truer than other effects, and premise two is all propositions and evaluations are effects, how could we possibly have true or false evaluations or propositions?
Because we evaluate.
I also think the thing with the way that Jim Bob sort of thinks about these things and offers his arguments is that you have to do a lot of work to even understand what he's saying, because I don't think he makes his point very clearly. So in an effort to make his point clearer than him, I just made a Substack article where I talk about this. So I'm going to go to that Substack article now, and people can sort of check it out if they want to. So let me bring that up. And the way that I put the argument that Jim Bob's making is, if something is a physical effect or event, which I think is, maybe a more the way I would talk about it, then it's not a truth-apt proposition, right? And I think that that is an accurate representation of what he said his first premise was. If I just bring my sort of windows around to go back to what he just said.
These evaluations are effects. And premise two is all true or false, right? Right. Yeah, it doesn't make sense, right? An effect is just an effect, right?
It's effects. What do you mean by truer?
Right. Yeah, it doesn't make sense, right? An effect is just an physics truer than an earthquake if they're both just pure effects.
Yeah, they're just effects. What do you mean by truer?
Right. Yeah, it doesn't make sense, right? An effect is just an effect, right? It's not true or false, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So if the premise one is that effects of physics can't be truer than other effects.
Yeah, effects of physics can't be truer than other effects. And the way that that's verbatim what he says, and the way that I have interpreted that is to say, you know, if something is a physical event, then it's not truth apt, right? Then it's not truth apt in any way. It doesn't have any truth valency or something. Okay. Let me actually zoom this in so it's a bit bigger for those of you from Alabama. That's still not very big, is it? Weirdly, it's like bigger on my screen than it is in the screen share, but it'll do. So let's just go back to Jim Bob talking.
And premise two is all propositions and evaluations are effects. How?
So the way he obviously phrases this argument when he says all propositions and values are effects, it doesn't combine with his first premise to make a logically valid argument. So I did do him the justice of interpreting him in a way where he is making a logically valid argument. So I took premise two to be, if naturalism is true, then reality is exhausted by physical effects, right? And so if you take these two claims together, that if something's a physical effect, then it's not truth apt. And if naturalism is true, then reality is exhausted by physical effects, then you get the intermediary conclusion. Therefore, if naturalism is true, there are no truth apt propositions. I mean, rather than quibble over exactly how to phrase this, you know, I'd be fine to phrase it in terms of like truth valent states or anything, you know, something like that. And then I just have this premise, but there are truth apt propositions. There are, that, you know, there is truth or something, might be more how someone like Jim Bob might want to phrase it. Therefore, naturalism is false. So let's just go through and see him presenting the argument like that.
How could we possibly have true or false evaluations or propositions?
Because we evaluate the effects based on an understanding of the cause.
If evaluations from your view is itself an effect, right? And your premise one is that effects of physics can't be truer than other effects. It makes no sense. But so you're agreeing that evaluations of our brain from our brain are actually effects. So that means when you come to an evaluation or make a truth claim about things, from your view, you have to say that it's an effect of previous physics, in motion.
Yeah, but see, what you're doing is you're saying it can't be truer, as if truer really means anything. Okay, I acknowledge and agree that the different effects, a tornado and an earthquake, are equal because they are both effects of whatever caused them, and they are neither more or less true than each other. Sure, but we can evaluate those effects, and so we can determine the likelihood of the cause to the.
When I say there's a tornado and an earthquake, and they're both effects of physics, therefore they're.
I obviously agree that Jim Bob's, making. I think he's not making a good point overall, but he's got this guy right. Is
neither true or false. What I'm saying is that from your view, there really isn't a difference between a tornado and happening and an evaluation happening because they're both direct causes of physics. What's the delineation between a tornado caused by physics or your evaluation of something in the world caused by physics?
So these are sort of, I mean, I remember when I had my discussion with Jim Bob, and it was very late at night in in Glasgow. But these were the sort of background premises that he was appealing to when I was, for example, talking about brain states and their involvement in our ability to produce verbal behavior and socially enforced rules around how to write symbols that we all agree on and things like that. And he was saying, look, if physics, then how is if you're a meat machine and it comes from your brain, then how is logic coming from your brain different than a fart coming from your gut? And it's like, rhetorically, that sounds quite, it's like, you can point the finger and laugh because it's like, see this silly person. They think that logic is like a tornado or like a fart or something. And obviously that's not what the person thinks. I mean, there are relevant differences that you can give. Just think about, for example, food production, like making a bowl of cereal. I think that Jim Bob would think that a bowl of cereal is physical, right? And you could say, well, if it's physical, like a tornado, well, how can that be? Because how do you get cereal from a tornado? Or, if it's physical, then it's farts, but you wouldn't want to eat your own farts or something. And it's like, yeah, because farts are physical and tornadoes are physical doesn't mean all physical things are like tornadoes and farts, right? Obviously, they are in some sense in terms of they reduce to only physical things. There are the same physical laws that govern or describe their movement, right? But they're also different in many other respects. They have different amounts of energy in them. They have different types of matter. The types of matter have different causal powers and all those sorts of things. The same holds true for the differences between the brain and the intestine, right? The intestines and the digestive system are functionally organized to extract certain types of chemicals and water from food that's been ingested and put through previous parts of the process and chomped down, right? Whereas the brain is functionally organized to operate around action potentials, and it assumes getting certain types of chemicals and things in the blood, and it assumes a certain type of water volume and structural integrity in a certain way. So there are all sorts of differences, and there are some similarities. Like, yes, both use potassium ions and action potentials to do certain sorts of things. The gut lining does it to move water through the tissue. The brain does it, but in a slightly different way and different degree, in order to fire electrical impulses down synapses. So there are both similarities and differences between these things. And yes, they happen to be the relevant differences, right? That's why one is producing farts and the other is connected to behavior and muscular movement and noises coming out of my vocal cords and so on. So, I don't like this very vague appeal to physical phenomena in the most low resolution and least descriptive terms. To then just say, so how from this pathetic description that I've given do you get complicated phenomena, right? Because it's just a rhetorical device. It's not seriously engaging with what the theory has to say.
Again, what you're trying to represent, I understand the concept of it, but I believe that you are basically just making an argument out of it through a play of words rather than the reality of the situation.
What's the play of words?
When you're saying that it's neither more true nor false, and it cannot be true or false, or it's a play on an understanding of what is true and false.
You do agree with premise one that effects of physics are not true or false; they just are.
I think this is an appropriate point then to talk into my critique of the argument that Jim Bob has offered, critique of my slightly strengthened version of his argument. So premise one, if something's a physical effect, then it's not a truth-apt proposition, or it can't be a truth-apt proposition, or something like that. We can quibble over the semantics, just give you whatever you want. So obviously, if someone buys P2, and I am someone who buys P2, that naturalism or physicalism, I use the two terms interchangeably. If people don't, they can, we can make further distinctions if they'll be useful, but I think for all intents and purposes, I'm happy to interchangeably use naturalism and physicalism. And I'm happy to commit myself to the claim that means that reality is exhausted by physical events. So suppose someone like me believes that, right? And then we go, well, what's logic on your view? Well, it's safe then to assume that I have some natural account, that is an account in terms of physical events, of what's going on there, right? An account where all of the things involved in logic are entirely grounded in or reducible to physical stuff that's happening, okay? So given that, it's not going to be the case that I'm going to agree to premise one, that if something is a physical effect, then it's not a truth-apt proposition, because I have a physical account of what truth-apt propositions are. So I'm going to disagree that if something's a physical event, then it can't be a truth-apt proposition, or it has no truth value. I'm going to think there's some subset of physical events that make up what it is for things to be true, right? I've got an account of that. But that is assuming that I sort of agree that there are truth-apt propositions, right? Obviously there, Jim Bob's going to turn around and say, well, I think the first thing Jim Bob will do is say, well, look, your theory is false. And it's like, well, I know you think that, but those aren't I think it's true. And so we've got a disagreement about what the correct account is. But you appealing to your belief doesn't generate an inconsistency in my beliefs. That just means we disagree with each other, which we already knew, right? From the kind of fact we're having a debate overall to begin with. Then we have this premise, but there are truth-apt propositions. And I think that that's probably the next thing, like someone like Jim Bob would come up onto. And they'll say something like, well, look, by truth-apt propositions, I don't mean the sort of things that are amenable to the type of account that you've given. I mean, non-physical, mind-independent things with intentionality or something like that. And obviously, there are some physicalists that might even grant some of those properties, and especially some naturalists who will. But let's just say I don't, right? Let's say Jim Bob defines truth-apt propositions to mean these non-natural or non-physical entities that are a part of spooky, non-physical, non-natural metaphysics. Well, in that case, this is simply going to be question begging, right? And given again that I'm a naturalist, I'm definitely not going to agree that P3 is true. I'm not going to say, look, if naturalism is true, reality is exhausted by physical things, and there are some non-physical things, right? I'm not going to think that. So you're guaranteed, just as long as this means non-physical things, you're pretty much guaranteed, right, that I'm not going to buy all of those things together. And so I can say, and then Jim Bob will go, oh, what? So you're denying that logic exists. And again, here we've got a sort of semantic bait and switch going on, because we've clarified at this point in the dialectic that what Jim Bob means by truth-apt propositions is a highly ramified, that means like coming with a lot of claims and commitments, a highly ramified account of propositions, metaphysically what they are, and it has some contents to it about non-naturalism and intentionality and being graspable by minds and things. Now, I do think actually there's criticisms in the vicinity that there's a whole lot of stuff about these things not being natural and introducing lexicon that's interdefinable, but actually it's very hard to understand what's even meant by any of that stuff. But leaving all that to sort of leaving those criticisms to one side, we've established then that you don't think that there's those sorts of things. You don't think when you say logic exists, you're not talking about that. So then the appropriate thing to do is to ask, well, when you say logic exists, what do you mean by that? And then the naturalist like myself can just turn around and say, well, look, all I mean by that is the stuff people do, like the markings they make on pages with pencils, those skills that they develop in logic class or reading a logic textbook, when they learn, different methods for doing proofs, they learn new words like syntax and semantics and how to apply those words and talk about logic and how to draw truth tables and things like that. These are either physical activities of drawing or typing things or making markings on screens or pages such that they can do logic, or of adopting the vocabulary so they can say sentences, but it all takes place in space and time, using their musculature, their brain neurology changing in response to the stimuli of the lessons and so forth. There's nothing non-natural involved in any of that, and that's all I mean when I say logic exists, is people do that stuff, right? And then Jim Bob will say, well, I don't mean that, and it's like, well, yeah, I know, because we disagree. But the point is that the argument here is obviously not going to go through, just as long as there being truth at propositions means this question begging premise, right? So let's
Effects of physics are, yes, they just are.
Okay, so effects of physics are neither true or false. They just are. Evaluations are effects of physics. How does it not follow that evaluations can't be true or false from that premise?
It's a different effect of physics.
Well, how is it different if it's strictly physics based?
Because an evaluation is how we determine if something is true or false, or how we determine if something is likely or unlikely. Or an evaluation is a mental process rather than a physical process.
You said it's a physical process, though. It's the brain doing things. So now we're not physical anymore?
The brain doing things is a physical.
Yeah. So what this guy should have done at this point is just go, no, I deny your, your claim that physical events can't do that. I think physical events do that. I think it's a physical event that's reducible to the brain.
Process. The understanding of it is not.
So the understanding, you agree, you said, is an effect of the.
Yeah, I think. Obviously, this guy doesn't have a very sort of sophisticated account of these things, and that's fine, actually, right? Because I don't think that this is an ideal context for anyone. This kind of combative debate performance is an ideal format for anyone to think about what their views are on these sorts of things. But yeah, obviously, this guy has some thinking to do about his views, and that's fine. Okay, there's a tension, right? He's not thought about this conjunction of claims before. That's all right. Like, sort of baby him through the tension. Go, what? Here's even a thing that you could do if you were especially honest, right? You could say, look, these are the claims in tension with each other. So you could reject that one, or you could reject that one, and then you'd be consistent again and avoid the argument, right?
The physical process, though.
Yes.
Okay, so you're still stuck, because if the understanding itself, the very evaluation that's occurring, is an effect of previous physics, it's no different in your view than the tornado. Now you're saying, well, no, it's different because we're evaluating stuff. I'm saying, no, the very evaluation, according to your own paradigm, is also an effect of physics. Something.
Yeah, he's not. He's just. Let's see if there's anything else he's done that is sort of more formal. Maybe we'll see.
In this first installment of Arguments Against Atheism, we explore a common position you may have heard from your atheist friends. We're like biological machines, and all of our actions and thoughts and everything are all just like determined by laws of physics and chemistry. I mean, this is basically common knowledge now. Well, in this video, I'm going to give you a fatal argument against this position, and I do mean fatal.
Fatal as in it will kill me? Yeah, I'm a materialist. I'm alive currently, so let's see if Jim Bob can kill me with his argument.
Welcome to Arguments Against Atheism, a series that aims to provide clear and simple arguments against common atheist positions. I'm Jim Bob, and I'm here to deliver the goods. First, I should clarify, not everyone who's an atheist believes that matter exists and only matter exists, nor does every atheist necessarily defend hard determinism.
Nice, well done, Jim Bob. I like that.
However, these are common positions taken by atheists. Well, atheism is just like the position that holds like there's no belief in God. Like, what are you even talking about? Well, yes, and many of you come to that position based on the assumption that physicality is all there is. So let's examine the assumption. According to the view that we are all merely biological machines, our actions, our thoughts, and our words are all determined by the laws of physics and chemistry. Let's say it in a much more direct way. Everything we think, everything we say, everything we do are all effects determined by physics and chemistry. Okay, well, let's take a look at some other effects of physics in the natural world. Let's take a tornado. This is an effect of a cause. Let's call it a combination of natural conditions. This is a blade of grass growing. Another effect of a cause, also a combination of natural conditions. These are two occurrences entirely determined by the laws of physics. Now, would it make sense to say one of these occurrences are more true or more false than the other? No, they just are.
So that's a grammatical quirk, right? Because you don't say of nouns that they're true. Like it's just a grammatical feature of language. Like Nathan, yes, true. Tornado, true. Grass, true. However, there is a tornado would be a statement that you would say is true. There is grass over there. True. Grass exists. True. Grass is usually green. True. Right. And so the reason why these examples that he's given, like tornado, true, and tornado, true, the reason that you wouldn't say that they're true is because they're not grammatical propositions, right? They're not sentences that express anything. So it's purely a grammatical quirk and not a feature of metaphysics that you wouldn't say that they're true.
For effects, we could say that a description of one or the other could be more accurate or less accurate. But as far as the effect goes, it is what it is. It's just an effect. It's not true or false because it's not propositional. It's an effect of physics. Make sense? Now, here's where we have a problem. If all of our thoughts and words and actions are caused by the laws of physics, then they too are effects of physics. That means our descriptions of tornadoes or blades of grass are also just effects, which are determined by the laws of physics and chemistry.
Yeah, but those that is the relevant difference, right? So no one's trying to say the tornado is true, but people are trying to say that the descriptions are true, right? And then some people have accounts of the relationship between the descriptions and the things that they describe. Here's how I would highlight this. And unfortunately, I'm going to unmask my my Bayesian joke, which I'll get around to in a moment. We'll finish off my Bayesian joke. But here's basically, what the picture that Jim Bob is painting. So we have our, let's go extra large because I like them extra large. Our deterministic universe, right? Can I kind of squish that? I'm not on a Mac, I'm on Windows. So it is not that button for control. And in our determined universe, we sort of move from one state to another. Love using visual aids to describe. And we're going to say each of these is determined. Okay. And then within that, there are sort of things. Okay. So here's one thing. I'm going to give it also I want it to have a crotcheted background. That thing can be a tornado. What was the other example he gave? Tornado and grass are our two examples. So here we have a tornado. Here we have grass. Right. So these are not things that feature in languages where we say, I mean, they could in principle, right? But I'm saying, like in the English language, for example, tornado is not the tornado, the thing, the entity is not a sentence that we say true or false to, and neither is grass. Then we've got that. And I tell you what I'll do. I will copy and paste because it will make my life easier. These are parts of the physical world. And these parts of the physical world are parts of the physical world that not language. Okay. Then there are other parts of the physical world. For example, there are these things. Homosexuals, Homo sapiens. That was a joke. I did that deliberately. and they do stuff. What the hell? Why did I do that wrong? Look how lovely this diagram is. Just, I'm basically a 5-year-old, like, oh, I'm drawing. I love drawing. So look, for this guy, yeah. Physically, he moves his hands to write. That's all physical on this account. Obviously, I'm offering this as a rival theory. I'm not just assuming, well, I'm assuming it's true to offer it as a theory, but obviously independently, someone like Jim Bob, I'm not saying that should convince Jim Bob to abandon his position, whatever that is, right? So on this theory, here's some physical set of states, and they can all be determined. It's someone gets a page of paper and they write this sentence. They write, the cat is on the mat, right? And they write that on a piece of paper. And then, you know, suppose there is a cat on the mat. We go, cool, that's true. And look what we just did. Oh my God, why am I doing it the wrong way around? I am actually very stupid today. Language. We got language. And the things that are language, right? There are these special words that we use, like true and false. And so physically, here is something that takes place in space and time, and someone makes markings on a page like this. And I would say true to that. And there's how we've got truth completely physically grounded. The entire story to tell about what's going on is physical in this case. And I'm not saying it is, but it could be wholly determined, every event sequentially following another. Here's another type of thing. Sounds that come out of people's mouths. They can, you know, we can control little flaps and stringy bits and push wind through them. And that wind sounds like this, right? And we've got a very sophisticated way of doing all that. And again, this person can come along. Nope, didn't mean to do that. They can come along and do this, and they can do this. Oh, shut up. Just give me. Right? And entirely physically, manipulation of sound waves. They've spoken a sentence, right? That's part of language. It's all a physical state. I don't think there's anything non-physical involved. And obviously that's sort of up for dispute, but still what I think. And I would say that is true as well. So we have here in a deterministic and wholly physical universe, we've got truth out of it, right? All we had to do was stop staring at tornadoes and grass and look at what takes place when people do language, right?
Combination of natural conditions. These are two occurrences entirely determined by the laws of physics. Now, would it make sense to say one of these occurrences are more true or more false than the other? No, they just are. They're effects. We could say that a description of one of the other could be more accurate or less accurate. But as far as the effect goes, it is what it is. It's just an effect. It's not true or false because it's not propositional. It's an effect of physics. Make sense? Now, here's where we have a problem. If all of our thoughts and words and actions are caused by the laws of physics, then they too are effects of physics. That means our descriptions of tornadoes or blades of grass are also just effects, which are determined by the laws of physics and chemistry. Well, didn't we just establish that effects of physics are neither true or false? They just are. How can
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously a premise in the argument, though the point I'm making is that I don't. This is sort of the classic thing in philosophy, right? Where we give one or two rubbish examples and then just encourage people not to think about it anymore. And this is bad philosophy, because philosophy is supposed to be think about things rigorously and in depth, not sort of getting to a really, you know, a really low resolution stopping point and then inferring a whole bunch of incorrect things about the world from that really low resolution starting point. What we should instead be doing is going, what are some physical states of affairs that we can come across? You know, and it does get fairly interesting. Like, what should you consider a language and not language, right? For example, questions like, how do you distinguish language from not language? If what are the criteria? And it's really hard. Like, I don't think there's anything essential to it, but there's really interesting questions there. For example, like, how, if suppose that there are alien forms of life that we're trying to communicate with us somehow, you know, how would we go about even recognizing that they were? Suppose that they were, I don't know, sort of like moss, or and they left etchings in rock or something. Presumably we'd look for patterns or something. Well, then what's the difference between a pattern and a language? What's the difference between, you know, cracking a crystal open and seeing the lines at the crack? And there's some super interesting stuff, right, in all of that. But we have to take all of the stuff. What's the difference between a sinusoidal wave from a pulsar star and a language? And that is, of course, the wow signal, right, that scientists received. I think it was in the 70s, and on a radio telescope, where they received this repeating signal, and so they assumed that this was maybe an extraterrestrial life trying to talk to us. And then it turned out to be the sinusoidal wave from a pulsar star, which is, you know, a star that's gone into a particular type of state where it's ejecting a bunch of energy from both ends, and it's like spinning around with some kind of regularity. And so we were receiving that on the end of our measuring instruments with some kind of regularity, and then inferring that that type of regularity was being produced by, you know, intelligent agents attempting to communicate with us, rather than by some unknown natural phenomena. It turned out to be some unknown natural phenomena instead. But the point I'm making is that overall, what we should be doing is, you know, building, like, when we say physical states, we should be including all sorts of things, and that includes, you know, writing, for example. I think that that's a good inductive case for the sort of point I'm trying to make. I don't think that Jim Bob wants to say writing on a page is spiritual or solely. He might say that the interpretation or understanding of it in the mind is, right. And again, I think the way we resolve that is by comparing that to a different theory and seeing what they both commit us to and what they predict and so on. But there's some physical stuff that we need to take into account now in our picture of physical states that agree. I think he would agree that movements of the hands that produce writing are physical. I think he would agree that sounds are physical. Again, perhaps not the hearing of the sound, or he might appeal to qualia and things like that. And again, then we just have to compare theories. But if he's simply just going to deny these alternative physicalist explanations to what those things are in terms of, you know, brain states or functional states or whatever, well, then all he's doing is question begging, and he's not really got a good argument or reasons. What he might have good reasons independently. You have to hash that out through the course of a conversation. But this presentation that the argument just leads there just falls apart, right?
An effect of physics be anything other than what it is, what it's determined to be by law? If an evaluation or proposition is an effect of physics, how can it be wrong or right? It just is, like a blade of grass or a tornado. Now, my critics will say, no, Jim Bob, propositions are different because they are descriptions of effects, to which I would respond, well, those descriptions are just effects determined by the laws of physics, right? Yeah, but we can evaluate our descriptions and see if they comport with reality, to which I would respond, are evaluations just effects determined by the laws of physics? Yeah, but we can test to see if our evaluations are accurate, to which I would respond, isn't testing just another effect?
Yeah, so I think I've done enough to sort of engage with that, and if people are interested, they can go on my underrated Substack, and you know, the more of you that go on my Substack, the more it'll encourage me to sort of write these short pieces as well and try to describe things. Maybe I'll actually use my Excalibur diagram. Maybe I'll use my Excalibur diagram in that, actually, because it is kind of interesting. kind of interesting. I mean, maybe kind of helpful in illustrating the point that I'm trying to make. And I'll make that small. And I will make that yellow. So I want to send it to the back. So you can watch me draw like a 3-year-old. And then we will go, oh my God, I keep doing this the wrong way around. This is proof that my brain rot is being rotted by Instagram. Yeah. Okay, cool. So I will use that. Now, the second thing that I was going to do, but I actually can't be bothered doing right now, and we'll make an argument on, is I'm going to make a dialogue tree of Bayesian arguments in philosophy and religion, and then I will use that to laugh about philosophy of religion and feel very smart. We do intuit logic. Nice conclusion, bro. I obviously disagree. Like, I mean, I get that you think that, given you believe different things to me. I think there's a thing people do where they say they intuit logic. I don't think that their mind is connecting to something non-natural when they do that. We still need more emergence for consciousness theory. I do not think that, because I don't think that there's even good accounts of what emergence is, how it could even fit in the physical world. Never mind good arguments or good reasons to think that that's required to understand mentality or the mind, or what people call consciousness, which I think is a term that should probably be avoided because it's so ramified and question-begging and strange. So think of first seeing geometry. Why? What's the difference between the two not language physical states? One was a tornado and one was grass. So one has a lot more carbon in it. The grass has more carbon in it than a tornado. Tornado is usually comprised of air. I mean, assuming we're talking about a single blade of grass, there's much more energy in a tornado usually, because, on Earth, tornadoes require quite a lot of energy to get going, whereas in a blade of grass, there's typically a very limited amount of chemical energy sort of stored in it. Size usually pretty different. I mean, obviously you get like dust devils and things like that, but tornadoes usually a lot bigger. Color, tornadoes usually not green. Grass is green. It's quite different, really. The intuited logic revealed. I just don't get this. I don't think that is a story of what happens. I think that children are socialized by books and things that contain mathematics, and logic is a social construction for me. I mean, that's one way of phrasing it. If the terms social construction are going to be helpful, for people to understand the view, then I'm sort of happy to buy them. Sometimes I'll buy them because they're polemical for people I don't like Peter Boghossian. But I mean, maybe a more fruitful way of describing it would be to say conventional, right? Or behavioristic even, but that could be problematic if you come from a social sciences and psychological background, because when I say behavioristic, you're going to basically assume that I mean behaviorism, like the theory, when that's not entirely what I mean. Instead, I mean that I just mean involving like behaviors and skills and activities that are learned physically. So it's multiple things, because it's not individually enforced, it's enforced collectively and socially. And that's what also takes place in academic institutions, where mathematicians and philosophers and other people kind of get together and study these things, and they will dispute what the norms should be or construct different systems and publish papers on these things. And then we sort of like share around our behavior for using different notations and showing what they can achieve and things like that. So yeah, I mean, I think one insight that kind of got me going with this, this type of retort tray is exactly why I said I think that using the term social construct can be unhelpful, because I'm not sure what it adds to I mean, it's saying that the word is made by people, and maybe there's an extra connotation that us using the word that way as opposed to some other way is not inevitable. It's not a feature, an innate feature of the mind, but rather a contingent feature of history, right? But maybe you wouldn't even grant that. And so I think if it just means that, and it helps to distinguish the position from some other, then yeah, I'd be fine saying that. And on my view, all words are like that. Even the Bobo and Kiki words that universally have onomatopoeia. So and those are cases we can talk about, and we can get into more sort of robust discussion around language. And the fact that on this account of language, all words are socially constructed isn't like, haha, so all words are socially constructed, your social constructivist theory is wrong. Well, that would be really silly, right? Because if it's a social constructivist theory, I'm not going to be like, oh, but by the way, sometimes social constructionism is wrong, right? I just think it can be relatively empty and unhelpful for clarifying what the position actually is. So there's a good paper that I think clarifies some of this by, who's the guy? Lewis Carroll. What the tortoise said to Achilles. So I'll bring it up. Story time. So this was published in 1895, but I think that this is a good way to begin to see this. So Achilles had overtaken a tortoise, and he seated himself comfortably on his back. So you've got to the end of our race course, said the tortoise, even though it does consist of an infinite series of distances. So the joke here is about, Zenoian paradoxes, and the point that Zeno brings up about, first you'd have to cross half that distance, then half of that again, then half again. So how do you ever traverse any distance, at all? How do you ever even finish the race? And so he's saying, even though you had to travel an infinite series of distances, you finished the race. Well done. I thought some wiseacre or other had proved that thing could be done. It can be done, said Achilles. It has been done. I don't know what solvitur ambulando means, but I'm sure that's very good. You see, the distances were constantly diminishing, and so... But if they had been constantly increasing, the tortoise interrupted, how then? Then I shouldn't be here, blah, blah, blah. This bit sort of doesn't matter. So then he's like, let's look at Euclid's propositions, and this is going to be our paradigm case for this kind of point about logic. A and B, so that anyone who accepts A and B is true must accept C is true, undoubtedly. and if some reader has not yet accepted A and B as true, he might still accept the sequence as a valid one, I suppose. No doubt such a reader might exist. He might say, I accept as true the hypothetical proposition if A and B be true, Z must be true, but I don't accept A and B is true. Such a reader would be abandoned. Yeah. And I might also, and might there not also be some reader who would say, I accept A and B is true, but I don't accept the hypothetical. Certainly he might. So basically, all this dialogue is just to like go and read it on your own if you don't like my commentary, my lazy ass commentary. But all of this is to establish that he's like, look, there's a hidden premise, right, behind all of this, and it's the unsaid sort of norm of logical reasoning, and that is if A and B are true, Z must be true, and that is, let's call that proposition C, right? And then it's like, okay, so now we've got 4 claims. We've got, if A and B, then Z, and then this extra claim C, A and B, then Z, right? And then it's like, well, look, now there's another claim that we've got to introduce, if A, B, C, and Z, if A, B, C, and Z, then A, B, C, and Z, right? And then he's like, you can form an infinite regress. Let me describe this with another Excali draw to make it clearer for you, because I'm doing a terrible job of sort of illustrating the point that I'm trying to make. So let's go extra large, right? So suppose we've got some argument that's like, what is going on here? Right, and so we infer B, and this is our argument. The point that the argument's making is like, well, why do we say that that's a valid conclusion? And it's because there's some additional rule here, which is the rule is like, this. The rule says something like that, and then the upshot of that rule is that it enables us to do that, right? Or maybe we could phrase it like, and then we ask, well, why is that sufficient? Why is it that when we see this rule, right, is valid, and we see that, then we infer that? Why are we justified then? And then we say, well, look, there's some rule that when you see all this together, right, then all this together enables that, right? So all this together right, that it's a valid, and I'm going to just say here pattern, right? Because what's in modern terms, what is going on here is that I'm sort of visually teaching myself to connect a certain pattern of symbols that I see, and I can obviously connect these symbols to sort of, more robust ways of thinking about this. Like I might, for example, come to think of this as like material conditional, right? And then material conditional is in my head connected to a truth table. And it has all sorts of values and things. So I'm visually learning how to match like visual patterns that I see with motor skills, which are the ability, and there might be pre-existing motor skills that I have, like the ability to type and use a mouse. I'm sure we can all remember times where we couldn't type or use a mouse or write on paper. and linguistic skills like producing noises, and we're mapping all of these skills together with what we're being told in these rules about how to do, what valid patterns mean. And valid just means you're allowed to do it, right? And now in reality, what is happening is that we're basically, we just learn this, right? This is like the rule where we stop. But you could essentially construct you know, an infinite regress of rules. And then what a philosopher might do is come along and look at a rule like this and say, like, you know, why is that the norm? Why is that the norm in logic? And we can debate that, right? And there are debates between, you know, the Lewisian view of conditionals and versus the Stalnaker view of conditionals versus the Diodorus of Cronus view of conditionals. And we can have these debates about what valid forms of inference are and everything else. But essentially what goes on, I claim, is that we learn behaviors, we learn certain linguistic skills of how to perform and do logic. Now those skills then are connected to some other things. So we have, like, you know, those skills get connected to some further things like semantics, right? And, you know, maybe then in philosophy of language, we have in here propositions, not what I wanted to do, representations, intentionality, and maybe we connect that to, like, some metaphysics, like grounding, truth makers, and so on, right? Now, basically, this is where, for most people, the weirdness gets introduced into all of this. So because, you know, there are terms for things like this, like aboutness, you know, and it's like, here's a sentence, here's a sentence that you see with your eyes, and how does that sentence attach to the thing? How is it about that thing? And here's so one sort of view uses these kind of like metaphors about what representations are. They're like things that are grasped or in people's minds, and they seem sort of non-natural, and they're about stuff in the world, and they're truth makers, and they're not just physical and stuff like that. I mean, there's a whole array of sort of things that are on the table here. And then one view that is more like my own sort of reduces all of these things to norms of behavior. I mean, that's an oversimplification. I think there's more that's still going on. And it, you know, essentially says, well, what, and this is like a point that's more in like postmodern philosophy and stuff, right? It's like, why is that the norm, right? One view, one potential view might say reality, like deep meta physics, right? Like it had to be that way. The world connects to the deeper truths about the human mind and these grounding truth makers and propositions and stuff make it so it has to be that way, and that's why one of these norms is correct, right? Here's another view: social history. Okay, why is it that way? Because your parents, or not your parents, your teachers taught you it that way. Okay, and then there are differences between these two views, because on this one view, it's sort of inevitable that it's one way rather than the other. On this other view, it's up for grabs. It's up to us. And it's not inevitable. That there are limits to the scope of these things, because what we get out of them is connected to what we can do with them, and there's no relationship between the way the world fundamentally is and these social tools that we've built, meaning that they will go on always and everywhere to be successful, right? They're successful tools in the certain niches of activities and practices that as humans have used them in, but there's no guarantee that they always will be for everything, right? And obviously there's a whole host of different views people can take, but that's just broadly to map out a kind of landscape here. And this is what kind of got me thinking about this first, was this, Lewis Carroll piece, what the tortoise said to Achilles. And if I go back to that paper, right? So he creates this kind of infinite regress, and he says, "Have you entered that?" So he keeps entering these like nested rules right into his notebook. Have you put that in your notebook? I have, blah blah blah, and you have to follow that. And then you have to accept my conclusion, right? With all these norms in place. Do I? Said the tortoise innocently. Let's make that quite clear. I accept A and B and C and D. Suppose I still refuse to accept Z. Then logic would force you to do it, Achilles triumphantly replied. Logic would tell you, you can't help yourself. Now that you've accepted A and B and C and D, you must accept Z, so you have no choice, you see. Whatever logic is good enough to tell me is worth writing down, said the tortoise. So enter it in your book, please. We will call it, if A and B and C and D are true, Z must be true, until I've granted that, of course. So it's quite a necessary step, you see. And I think that this is sort of the joke, is that I think I'm interpreting this as the joke, is that as people have to justify these norms, which aren't really justified in anything other than social history more and more, they resort to more and more sort of like hand wavy things that seem far less principled, like you have to, it's quite necessary, objective, and those sorts of things. And I think it's because of the uneasiness of having to justify those groundless things. I see, said Achilles, and there was a touch of sadness in his tone. Here, narrator, having pressing business at the bank, was obliged to leave the happy pair and did not again pass the spot until some months afterwards. When he did so, Achilles was still seated on the back of the much enduring tortoise and was writing in his notebook, which appeared to be nearly full. The tortoise was saying, "Have you got that last step written down? Unless I've lost count, that makes 1,001. There are several millions more to come, and would you mind, as a personal favour, considering what a lot of instruction this colloquy of ours will provide for the logicians of the 19th century? Would you mind adopting a pun that my cousin, the mock turtle, will then make, and allowing yourself to be renamed Tortoise?" "As you please," replied the weary warrior in the hollow tones of despair as he buried his face in his hands, "provided that you, for your part, will adopt a pun the mock turtle never made and allow yourself to be named Achilles." So, oh no, I've stopped my camera. I'm just going to restart it. think you can still hear me. This happens when I knock things. Yeah, I'm back. So, I mean, there's much more to say about all this, and I will go into it, because I think that there's really good evolutionary evidence from archaeology and from recent history that we can look at to see the way that languages have evolved in these ways and socially caught on, and the way that powerful mechanisms for reasoning and more complicated information processing and so forth have kind of propagated and become tools of engineering. I think where that stuff really gets clear and powerful is in the history of computer science as you go through that. And so thinking about the way that computers adopt some of these ideas and physically do things, and the way that people use those as tools. And then, I do want to make some sort of more detailed videos getting into these things. And I guess I want to do justice to the alternative rival views. But all of that is to say that, my honest opinion here is that these more traditional philosophical views, or even more traditional views in linguistics, like the Saussurean view, I've not read the chat yet, but I'm certain that someone will be saying, you talked about the signifier, but you didn't talk about the signified, right? And there are these words that essentially mean, the mind representing non-physical extra additional thing that a human has. And I tend to just find, obviously that's question begging, it's not going to do anything from my view, but I tend to find that they're really sort of content empty weasel words when whenever you have any real questions about, okay, so what's the relationship between someone getting a head injury and not being able to produce language anymore, right? What's the relationship between activity in these areas of the brain and speech production, right? What's the relationship between why we make certain sounds for certain things rather than others? Given this non-physical thing, couldn't the relationships between the sounds that we produce and the other types of stimuli that we use for those things that we're referring to be anything, right? So this is like the Kiki Bobo thing. Like, why is it that humans find certain onomatopoeia with certain things? And I think I think that all of these different lines of evidence just make more sense under views where humans are physical agents, right, rather than non-physical agents. Because I don't think if people were non-physical agents, that you would expect that our languages to be connected to the physical world we find ourselves in the type of way that they are. So I do plan on producing videos that are more, go into more and more depth on these things. I think there's some really interesting topics in those areas that I'm really interested in. And I just want to give them more justice than I think I can when I'm talking off the cuff, because, they're really quite difficult. And I will say there are people who disagree with me on some of these things, who I think do have quite sophisticated views, right? So my friend James is doing his neuroscience PhD in semantic representation in the brain, and he has incredibly sophisticated physicalist views that are representational. And I'm not 100%, I don't really rule out representations wholesale. I'm not really sure, of what role that they have in my view, other than that for the vast majority of cases, I think the behavioristic account makes more sense. So there's things to think about, right? For my view, I definitely don't have a whole account. What I will say is I think that there's much more fruit in the direction of my account than there is in the direction of competing accounts, specifically the classical kind of accounts of philosophy of religion, not philosophy, of philosophy, broadly conceived as an academic discipline. And what I will say is I think that a lot of these assumptions about this model of the way that language works as well inform the way that philosophers engage with the questions that they raise in their subject, right? So if you sort of adopt this uncritical view of language and the way that it relates to things in the world, what that means is that you're likely to trust your armchair theorizing about what you call the a priori. Because rather than language being something that you've contingently picked up and been taught socially, right? Language is this structure that attaches into the world. And so you can interrogate things about it introspectively, and you will reach, deep and meaningful, even ultimate conclusions about the world, rather than finding out quirks of how grammar works or something, right? So, quirks of how 21st century grammar works. So, I mean, I think that this really does have some useful import too for metaphilosophical disputes. But I do need to give, a structured account of what these are, and also give justice to the sort of rival and competing views, and make the case as to why I prefer my view, especially if I want to present that to an audience in any sort of way that's supposed to convince them, right? So, yeah, that's that. Yeah, I'm not a Chomskyan, and obviously that's another dispute that touches on all of this, the sort of disputes between Chomskyan recursive grammars and Chomskyan universal recursive grammars versus Everettian interpretations in linguistics, or Worthian interpretations, and so forth. That's another avenue to this whole debate, where there's lots of empirical data to engage with and cool stuff. Doesn't Kane B have good videos on this? Yes, Kane B has excellent videos on Achilles and the Tortoise. Intuitive language is a branch of logic study. True sentence. But yeah, I agree with Roberto. Like when you say intuitionist logic is not what you think it is, intuitionist logic, right? It has the word intuitive in it, but you can't read off of that some metaphysics of intuition. Like, it's not mystic Meg. Like, I think I'm going to come up with a metalogical proof today. I'm really thinking that there's a way to solve that. There's like this form that'll solve Goldbach's conjecture, and I'm just gonna, just because it has the word intuitive in it doesn't mean that's what's happening. There are syntactical rules, and it fits the model that I described of people learning rules to manipulate symbols in the exact same way as I said. So yeah, it's not some kind of like counterexample, right, to what I said. I mean, what would really be a counterexample to what I said would be something like and it wouldn't be a counterexample, but it would be highly unexpected on my view, right? And it would be something like someone who's not informed by a background in these languages could sort of sit around disconnected from them and, just like think really hard or in a special way or on a drug trip or something, and like come up with some statement like, about a problem that's not provable through the methods that I claim are the methods we're inheriting, something like that, right? Something like that would be intuitive in the sense that you mean it, and not really unexpected on my view. Thank you, Mono. I think you gave me some good compliments. I actually think that this is social history, but once the social constructs provides a lot of utility, evolutionary mechanisms kick in. Yeah, that's basically the account that I'm providing as well. I don't think it's like brutally selective. There's not like strong selection pressures, and so useless bits of language can like kind of stick around. But I think broadly it's like an evolutionary type mechanism that's going on to create and preserve language and modify it over time. Right. How does language attach to the world? Well, on my view, through behaviors. So let's go to the classic Hasok-Chang lecture. Where's it gone? The classic, the gold standard for the truth. I think it's around here.
I'm going to see if it works. See if I can make it work. But I know it's tricky. Yeah, thank you. See if I can describe that.
Right, is this where he talks about operational coherence? I'm just trying to find.
Is the best.
I'm trying to find the right point, and I think he's taking questions at this point.
Active realism in chapter 4 of the Is Water H2O book, and I'm also going to try to do that by means of this new notion of truth, which I just presented to you. And
okay, so he's already kind of...
I mean, by epistemic activities, I mean activities that are explicitly intended coherence theory of truth. Coherence in that simple-minded version is taken to mean mere logical consistency within a set of statements. Now that is a real philosophical disaster, that kind of notion of truth. An invitation to vicious circularity and the most problematic kind of relativism. It eliminates any inherent link between knowledge and reality. So James O. Young here, writing in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, notes that more plausible versions of the coherence theory take the coherence relation as some form of entailment or mutual explanatory support between propositions. In order to do things successfully in decree to relativism and circularity. And in contrast, operational coherence isn't liable to those problems because it cannot be achieved in any arbitrary fashion by decree, wishful thinking, or mere mutual agreement. On the contrary, in order to do things successfully in the world, which is what operational coherence is conducive to, we need to have an understanding and mastery of our surroundings. It is operational coherence, not the mirage of correspondence, through which the mind-independent worlds is actually brought
to. Basically, there's a whole theory out there if you care to delve into it. The Hasok-Chang video Bible, that is correct. Is music part of it? I mean, I've not really thought or theorized about that, to be honest. I mean, I think music can be a part of language, you know, like, I mean, there's like drums that tribes use and things. I don't really know. It seems like an empirical question that I don't know a lot about. But yeah, so I mean, I think I'll park it there. If people, that operational coherence, it's not coherence. And what are those unwanted hinge entailments? Because you've not told me any. Oh, Michael, stop dropping shit philosophy hot takes in the chat. Okay. Like, okay, there can be problems for this view, but the most hand wavy rebuttal of, oh, there's bad stuff you don't like if you believe what you believe. Cool story, bro. Like, for example, you don't believe in magic like I do. And you don't have like a really bad set of ontological commitments like I do. And you have to be a physicalist, and that makes John Vervaeke sad. For fuck's sake. I don't mind people not adopting my views, just as long as they do so in like a good way where they actually. Oh, just pointing out the truth. Oh God. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I was wrong, but I'm sorry for criticizing you. I didn't realize that you were telling me the truth. You should have said right at the start that you were going to tell me the truth, because then I wouldn't have disagreed with what you had to say if I knew it was true before you said it. Fucking idiot. Right. So, I need to find a way to not get so triggered by this sort of stuff, but it just winds me up. It's like, Michael, from the stuff you're saying, you're a white belt, right? Have some fucking humility and like go, here's some stuff I don't actually know about. What I need to do here is learn about it first and see if I agree or disagree with it. And maybe I am going to still disagree with it, but at least I'll have something coherent to say about it. But instead, you know, you just jump to stupid fucking talking points that say absolutely nothing. It's so annoying. right? And like, there are people who disagree with me who have like good things to say, and they force me to improve my views or to even reject or modify them, right? For example, when I had a conversation with James about this, he brought up like the poverty of stimulus argument, and that wasn't something that I'd thought about before, and it was something that I needed to think about to sort of refine my account. Okay, so well, I'm gonna leave it there anyway, and do some other stuff with my time because it's almost bedtime. But actually, you don't make me happy, Michael, so you're in timeout. Okay, bye everyone.